What does Neville Goddard truly mean when he says, "I am rich"? And why does this single phrase hold the power to change the very structure of your life from within? In this video, you will discover how Neville's understanding of richness goes far beyond money or possessions. It's about awakening to the creative consciousness that makes all things possible. About learning how the words "I am" are the divine keys that shape reality, and how feeling yourself to be rich before the evidence appears summons wealth, peace, and fulfillment from the unseen. You'll see how to turn this teaching into living experience, how to dissolve the illusion of lack, and how to claim the vibration of abundance so deeply that your world begins to shift in response. This is where it begins, the unraveling of the false belief that richness is something you earn, rather than something you are. This is how it unfolds. Neville's secret was that the phrase "I am" is not a description but creation itself taking form. This is where truth breaks through. What you declare "I am" to be, you become. Because consciousness is the only reality. This is why it matters. Until you stop saying "I will be rich" and start knowing "I am rich," you are holding wealth at arm's length. This is the moment the illusion fades. Richness is a state of consciousness, and once you live from it, everything you touch begins to reflect it. This is where the promise awakens. Neville taught that imagination felt as real is the seed of every manifestation, and to feel rich is to water that seed with certainty. This is where perception shifts. Money ceases to be a goal and becomes a mirror of inner identity. This is the turning point. You start to see that being rich is not a result of effort, but of awareness. This is where the veil lifts. "I am" is the name of God within you, and each time you join it with an idea, you breathe life into that idea. This is the revelation unfolding. Every outer condition of poverty or limitation is only a reflection of the inner declaration, "I am not enough." This is where alignment happens. The moment you dare to say and feel "I am rich," you align with divine sufficiency. This is the awakening of creative power. Neville's message was never about wishful thinking, but about conscious creation through identity. This is where energy gathers. Your thoughts become magnetized around the truth you affirm. This is how transformation begins, when the inner feeling of wealth becomes more real to you than the lack outside. This is where the shift becomes visible. The bridge of events starts to form to support your new state. This is where you finally understand, "I am rich" is not arrogance, but remembrance. You are the source from which riches flow. This is where it all converges. Neville's secret, hidden in plain sight, was that you must become what you seek, not chase it. This is where your new story starts. You no longer ask for wealth. You walk as wealth itself. Can you imagine what happens when you stop striving to get rich and instead awaken to the truth that you already are the source of riches? This is where Neville's teaching deepens, because the real meaning of "I am rich" is not about having things. It's about entering a state where wealth flows naturally because you have become its embodiment. This is where it begins to make sense. Neville said that every state already exists, and when you assume the feeling of being rich, you move into that state in consciousness, and the world rearranges itself to match. This is where illusion fades. You begin to see that trying, forcing, and struggling are signals that you've forgotten your identity as the creator. This is how it unfolds. You realize that the only real work is inner assumption, the art of feeling it real until the outer mirrors your conviction. This is where truth whispers. Every emotion of abundance you feel is a silent command to the universe to confirm it. This is where the shift strengthens. Those who know they are rich do not speak or act from lack, for their inner world overflows with sufficiency. This is why it matters. When you declare "I am rich," you claim oneness with the infinite source that forms gold from dust and fortune from faith. This is where energy crystallizes. Thoughts and emotions align to magnetize opportunities that match your inner certainty. This is where the unseen begins to move. The bridge of incidents, as Neville called it, quietly forms to deliver what your state demands. This is where alignment breathes. You no longer look outward for evidence, because the feeling itself is proof of what's unfolding. This is where resistance dissolves. The tension of trying to earn wealth fades as you remember you already are it. This is where creative power expands. Each repetition of "I am rich" carves a deeper channel in consciousness through which abundance flows. This is where self-worth awakens. You stop measuring value by possessions and start measuring it by awareness. This is where the story matures. You no longer hope for wealth, you embody it in silence, and the world obeys. This is where peace replaces pressure. You know now that the universe is responsive, not resistant, to your state of being. This is where your eyes open. You see the subtle reflections of your new consciousness appearing in conversations, coincidences, and calls. This is the turning point. You begin to feel gratitude not because you received, but because you already possess within. This is where you realize the statement, "I am rich," is not about future fortune, but about present identity. This is where the journey deepens. You are not manifesting money. You are remembering that wealth is your natural vibration. This is where the next revelation waits. Richness, as Neville taught, begins and ends with consciousness alone. Picture for a moment what your life would look like if you no longer doubted that everything you needed was already flowing to you in unseen ways. This is where the third layer of Neville's teaching unfolds. For "I am rich" is not an affirmation to convince yourself. It is an awakening to the consciousness of abundance that has always been present, waiting for your recognition. This is where the current of life changes direction, because once you believe wealth is separate from you, you create distance. But once you know it is within you, that distance disappears. This is where the heart expands, understanding that wealth is not in objects but in awareness, the quiet knowing that there's always enough and more is on its way. This is where the illusion of lack begins to fade, because you stop measuring your worth by what you see and start trusting the invisible flow behind all things. This is where truth rises like dawn. Abundance is not something you chase. It is the light you walk in when you say, "I am rich," and mean it. This is how your reality softens. Old habits of scarcity lose their grip, and a new ease fills your mind. This is where everything starts to respond. People, opportunities, and resources seem drawn to you, as though they always belong to your orbit. This is where Neville's secret breathes. You are the cause, not the effect, of your financial condition. This is where old patterns dissolve. You stop praying for money and start feeling the joy of already having. This is where gratitude blooms from certainty. You thank the invisible as if the visible were already here. This is where stillness becomes power. The quieter your trust, the faster the universe organizes. This is where clarity dawns. Poverty was never real. It was only a shadow cast by disbelief in your creative self. This is the turning point. Faith is no longer hope but perception, the ability to see the unseen as already done. This is where you realize that your consciousness is the factory of every future outcome. This is where energy harmonizes. You begin to speak, think, and walk as wealth, without forcing, without fear. This is where the unseen hands of life arrange coincidences so seamless they feel miraculous. This is where joy replaces effort, and you find yourself naturally guided to right actions that match your rich identity. This is where all becomes simple again. "I am rich" is no longer a phrase you repeat. It is the atmosphere you breathe. This is where the next threshold awaits, the realization that richness is not gained, but remembered. Now consider this. What if every scene you hold in your imagination is the seed from which your future wealth grows? This is where Neville's teaching becomes vividly alive, because he said imagination is not a daydream, but the creative power itself, shaping reality in exact correspondence to the picture you sustain. This is where creation truly begins. The image you form and feel as real in the mind is the blueprint the outer world obediently follows. This is where it gets profound. When you visualize yourself as already living in richness, surrounded by ease and comfort, you are not pretending, you are planting. This is where illusion crumbles. Poverty is only the forgetting of your inner image of wealth. This is how transformation ignites. Each time you see yourself abundant in imagination, you strengthen that state in consciousness until it becomes your dwelling place. This is where the inner movie becomes more convincing than the outer facts, and suddenly, facts start to change to align with it. This is where Neville's precision shows. He urged you not to imagine for the sake of wishing, but for the sake of feeling it real. This is where subtle magic happens. You notice that the more vivid your inner vision, the less you chase and the more you attract. This is where alignment sharpens. You begin to act naturally from the image within, and outer conditions harmonize like reflections in still water. This is where resistance fades. There is no need to force manifestation when the feeling itself is proof of creation. This is where new confidence rises. You trust your unseen picture more than fleeting appearances of lack. This is where Neville's wisdom takes form. The image of being rich is not fantasy. It is the rehearsal of reality. This is where clarity deepens. You understand that every image impregnated with belief must eventually harden into fact. This is where the bridge of events begins to move. People appear, doors open, and synchronicities whisper that your vision is alive. This is the turning point. You realize imagination was never a toy. It was the tool of creation given to every human being. This is where the old story of, "I can't afford," dissolves into the new one. "I already have more than enough." This is where you walk in quiet assurance, no longer needing outer confirmation to feel worthy. This is where your imagination becomes your greatest investment, the inner portfolio that multiplies through faith. This is where the next unveiling waits, the discovery that what you imagine with conviction becomes inevitable. Suppose you discover that the true key to Neville's "I am rich" lies not in the words themselves, but in the feeling they awaken. This is where the invisible mechanism of manifestation reveals itself. For Neville said, "Feeling is the secret, and until you feel the reality of being rich, your words remain empty echoes in the chamber of wishful thought." This is where the current turns inward. You stop begging life to change and start embodying the vibration of one who already possesses. This is where emotion becomes creation. When you generate the inner warmth of satisfaction, comfort, and joy, you are broadcasting a frequency that life must reflect. This is where the alchemy of consciousness occurs. The moment you feel abundance, it becomes a living force, shaping people and events to confirm it. This is where illusion collapses. The outer world has no choice but to align with your emotional certainty. This is how it unfolds. You begin to walk, speak, and breathe differently because the feeling of wealth has entered your bones. This is where confidence becomes calm. You no longer rush for results. You rest in the truth of what you already are. This is where gratitude replaces desire, because once you feel it done, wanting transforms into quiet appreciation. This is where Neville's genius shines. He taught that to feel is to fuse the idea with your subconscious, sealing it as fact. This is where subtle shifts occur. You notice yourself naturally drawn to ideas, people, and paths that match your new emotional atmosphere. This is where the bridge of incidents strengthens. The world moves to meet the vibration you sustain. This is where you start living from the end, not towards it, because the feeling assures you it's already finished. This is where time bends. Manifestations arrive not by effort but by resonance. This is where the voice of doubt softens, for you now trust the silent rhythm of creation that feeling ignites. This is where the outer evidence begins to sparkle. Unexpected money, kind gestures, opportunities all echo your inner tone. This is the turning point. You no longer need to control outcomes because your inner world is already rich. This is where you understand that feeling is not pretending. It is pre-living the reality that is forming. This is where mastery begins. To sustain the feeling of wealth even in emptiness, knowing the invisible is already full. This is where it all becomes clear. The one who feels rich is rich long before the world agrees. This is where the next revelation emerges. The truth that sustaining the feeling is the most powerful prayer of all. Envision a world where everything around you begins to rearrange itself, the moment you decide, in feeling and conviction, that you are already rich. This is where Neville's teaching takes form in the physical, because what he called the bridge of incidents is the invisible sequence of events that connects your inner assumption to its outer expression. This is where the unseen begins to move. You feel something shifting even before evidence appears, subtle yet unmistakable. This is where the magic of trust is tested, because the bridge rarely looks like wealth arriving. It looks like random changes, coincidences, and unexpected turns that all lead to your assumed end. This is where you start to understand that the universe is not delaying, it's orchestrating. This is where patience becomes creative faith. You stop doubting the process, knowing that everything unfolding is part of the path you set in motion by declaring, I am rich. This is where illusion loses power. You no longer panic when things look uncertain, because you recognize the rearrangement of reality in progress. This is where alignment reveals itself. You see how people, conversations, and timing all begin to cooperate in ways your logical mind could never plan. This is where gratitude deepens, because you know that every step, even the confusing ones, carries you closer to the reflection of your inner wealth. This is where Neville's brilliance glows. He reminded us that persistence in assumption is the only bridge we ever need to cross. This is where you feel the thrill of creation. You begin to sense the invisible weaving of circumstances designed to confirm your belief. This is where the outer world becomes your mirror, reshaping itself in obedience to the state you occupy. This is where anxiety dissolves. You stop asking when and start saying now, because your end is already secure. This is where the feeling of richness sustains you through the in-between, the unseen work of the universe aligning to your identity. This is where movement becomes magic. Each event, even the ones that seem like setbacks, are steps on the golden bridge toward manifestation. This is where the laws of life bow to your conviction, bending time and sequence to serve your declaration. This is the turning point. You no longer chase results. You trust that the bridge knows the way better than you do. This is where calm replaces control. You allow life to deliver in perfect sequence, knowing your assumption already exists in finished form. This is where the process becomes beauty. You see that I am rich was never about waiting for wealth, but walking the bridge as if you already possess it. This is where the next horizon opens. The realization that the bridge of events is not built by effort, but walked by faith. Think of the moment when you finally grasp that wealth is not something outside of you to obtain, but a reflection of who you believe yourself to be in your innermost identity. This is where Neville's teaching pierces the veil. For he emphasized that I am rich is a declaration of being, not of acquisition, and it carries the full weight of creation. This is where transformation settles in. You realize that every thought, word, and feeling molds the person you are becoming, and your outer world cannot help but follow. This is where the subtle alchemy occurs. The inner conviction that you are wealthy rewrites the subconscious scripts that once demanded limitation. This is where your daily actions gain quiet power, because when you move as someone who is rich, your choices naturally align with abundance. This is where clarity sharpens. You see that striving, struggling, and chasing are all signs of false identity, and the truth is simply being what you declare. This is where trust blossoms. You no longer ask for riches, you embody the state that generates them effortlessly. This is where alignment resonates. Others respond to your energy, doors open, and circumstances bend because identity is always louder than words. This is where old fears dissolve. The inner resistance that once blocked wealth cannot exist in the presence of self-certainty. This is where Neville's principle becomes action. You repeat not for repetition's sake, but to saturate your consciousness with your new reality. This is where the inner voice strengthens. You begin to speak to yourself as one who has always been rich, and the universe answers in kind. This is where external validation becomes optional. The proof of richness now lies within, not in accounts or assets. This is where patience becomes effortless, trusting that identity, once assumed, cannot fail. This is where the feeling of richness permeates every corner of your being, making scarcity feel foreign and impossible. This is where your imagination gains gravity. The images you sustain in your mind now pull outer circumstances toward you like magnets. This is where empowerment blooms. You understand that control lies in the self, not in external conditions. This is where the bridge of events moves more fluidly, because the stronger your identity, the less resistance appears. This is the turning point. You now know that wealth is the natural byproduct of a self that declares, without doubt, I am rich. This is where consciousness dominates reality. You are no longer chasing, but simply being, and all follows effortlessly. This is where the next revelation waits. The understanding that identity is both the seed and the harvest of abundance. Ask yourself what happens when you finally release the belief that wealth must be earned through struggle, toil, or sacrifice, and instead recognize that I am rich signals effortless creation from the inside out. This is where Neville's teaching pierces conventional thinking, because he made it clear that effort is often the indicator that you have not yet assumed your true identity. This is where freedom begins. You no longer labor for results. You allow the inner state of richness to dictate the pace and path of manifestation. This is where tension dissolves. The weight of having to is replaced by the lightness of knowing that what is yours cannot be withheld. This is where clarity sharpens. You start to differentiate between action that arises naturally from alignment and action born from anxiety or striving. This is where the unseen responds. When you stop pushing, the universe begins to orchestrate events in ways you could never engineer. This is where belief becomes tangible. The longer you dwell in the feeling of being rich, the less outer resistance can persist. This is where creativity flows freely. Solutions, ideas, and opportunities arrive unbidden because you have made room for them in consciousness. This is where the mind relaxes. You no longer calculate, force, or manipulate outcomes, trusting instead that your inner state commands the outer world. This is where Neville's insight illuminates. I am rich is not a wish, it is a statement of being, and the law of consciousness must obey it. This is where patience transforms into power. You see that every delay or apparent obstacle is only the universe arranging itself to mirror your inner certainty. This is where effortless manifestation becomes visible. The bridge of incidents unfolds naturally, in perfect sequence. This is where you act without anxiety. Every step you take feels supported by an invisible hand guiding you to abundance. This is where the illusion of lack fades completely. The struggle disappears because it was never real, only a reflection of misaligned consciousness. This is where energy harmonizes. You move in rhythm with life, instead of against it. This is where the inner self relaxes into its natural authority. Richness is not something to capture, it is something to inhabit. This is where faith crystallizes. You no longer hope for wealth, you embody it as a living, breathing certainty. This is the turning point. The moment you understand that I am rich requires no striving, only full acceptance and immersion. This is where the next revelation emerges. The realization that the less you push, the more life flows, bending to your assumed state. This is where ease becomes the hallmark of abundance, and effort is revealed as the shadow of forgotten identity. Consider the possibility that every coin, every opportunity, and every act of abundance begins not in the marketplace or bank, but in the vivid theater of your imagination. This is where Neville's teaching comes alive. He insisted that imagination is not fantasy, but the tool through which reality itself is molded. And to imagine yourself rich is to plant the seed of inevitable manifestation. This is where your inner world gains gravity. The more detailed and emotionally charged the image of wealth, the more the universe is compelled to reflect it. This is where resistance begins to soften. Outer circumstances start to shift, not because of effort, but because your imagination has already sculpted the future. This is where perception transforms. You begin to see everything through the lens of abundance, noticing opportunities and resources previously invisible. This is where faith solidifies. The scene you imagine with conviction carries authority that your outer world cannot deny. This is where subtle synchronicities appear. People, messages, and circumstances converge to validate the inner picture you sustain. This is where Neville's precision matters. He taught to feel every detail as if it were already happening, merging emotion with visualization until it becomes indistinguishable from reality. This is where doubt loses its grip. The clarity of your imagined scene outweighs any conflicting outer evidence. This is where alignment becomes effortless. Actions, thoughts, and decisions naturally follow the blueprint created in your mind. This is where creation accelerates. The richer and more compelling your inner movie, the faster outer conditions respond. This is where the bridge of events strengthens. The unseen hand of life arranges coincidences in perfect harmony with your inner vision. This is where patience becomes natural. You wait not anxiously, but confidently, for what your imagination has already produced. This is where joy amplifies. Imagining abundance fills you with an undeniable satisfaction that propels manifestation. This is where control shifts. You no longer need to manipulate circumstances because your inner image has already taken command. This is where the outer world begins to mirror your inner certainty. The first signs of wealth manifest with subtle grace. This is where belief becomes tangible, knowing that what you imagine and feeling cannot fail to manifest. This is the turning point. You realize imagination is not merely a tool, but the very canvas on which reality is painted. This is where the next layer awaits, the understanding that your inner scenes are the true currency of abundance. Now consider this. What if you stopped imagining a journey toward wealth, and instead imagined yourself already there, living as the embodiment of richness in every detail of your life? This is where Neville's teaching reaches its profound depth, because living from the end means assuming the feeling of your fulfilled desire as if it has already been realized, and allowing that state to dictate every thought, action, and perception. This is where the old struggle falls away. You no longer negotiate with reality. You inhabit it internally, and the outer world bends to match. This is where clarity sharpens. You see that I am rich is not about hoping, planning, or striving, but about being and feeling rich now. This is where the bridge of events accelerates. The sequence of life aligns naturally when you no longer act from lack or uncertainty. This is where identity solidifies. When you live from the end, your inner self becomes fully consistent with the state you desire. This is where subtle power flows. The unconscious mind, recognizing your assumed end, orchestrates thoughts, impulses, and actions in perfect harmony with your richness. This is where resistance melts away. You no longer wrestle with circumstances because you are operating from certainty, not doubt. This is where outer reality begins to reflect your inner vision with astonishing precision. This is where patience transforms into confident expectation. You wait without tension because the end is already present in your consciousness. This is where gratitude saturates your being, reinforcing the truth of your assumed state. This is where your imagination gains undeniable authority. The scenes you live from internally manifest naturally and effortlessly. This is where synchronicities become common. You recognize the orchestrated movement of life that confirms your inner state. This is where action flows without effort. Each step feels inspired and perfectly timed, aligned with the life of abundance. This is where the unseen becomes palpable. You feel the invisible hand guiding circumstances, shaping outcomes to match your living assumption. This is where joy becomes natural. You are rich in spirit, and the world reflects it in tangible ways. This is where the turning point solidifies. You understand that wealth is the result of identity, not accumulation. This is where calm replaces striving, and presence replaces impatience. This is where I am rich becomes a lived reality, not a distant dream. This is where the next revelation emerges, the recognition that from the end, life itself is your collaborator in creation. Envision a world where your subconscious mind acts as the tireless architect of your life, faithfully translating every assumption you hold into tangible results. This is where Neville's teaching deepens, for he revealed that the subconscious does not question, debate, or negotiate. It simply enacts what it is fed by your imagination and feeling. This is where power becomes invisible. You no longer struggle against circumstances because the silent partner within has already set the stage for manifestation. This is where alignment strengthens. The moment you feel rich, your subconscious begins arranging people, opportunities, and events to confirm that state. This is where old patterns dissolve. Beliefs rooted in scarcity or limitation lose their grip as the subconscious rewrites itself with your assumed identity. This is where trust takes hold. You stop forcing results because the inner machinery of life responds naturally to the energy you maintain. This is where repetition matters. The more consistently you dwell in a state of richness, the more your subconscious anchors it as reality. This is where clarity emerges. You recognize that every outward struggle was only a reflection of conflicting internal scripts. This is where the inner world becomes sovereign. The subconscious is no longer sabotaging, but cooperating with your conscious intent. This is where subtle signs appear. Coincidences, synchronicities, and opportunities begin to confirm your inner reality. This is where faith is no longer abstract. It is the lived awareness that the unseen works tirelessly in alignment with your assumptions. This is where the bridge of events grows stronger. The unconscious mind ensures the path unfolds effortlessly. This is where the feeling of abundance permeates. You start trusting without visible proof, because proof exists within. This is where action becomes inspired rather than forced. Every step naturally reflects your internal state. This is where joy and ease dominate. You are rich in consciousness, and outer conditions follow suit. This is where identity and subconscious unity become undeniable. The world reflects exactly who you are being internally. This is where the turning point arrives. You realize that I am rich is not about control, but about alignment with the silent creative partner within. This is where the unseen orchestration becomes tangible. You notice doors opening, people responding, and events synchronizing. This is where empowerment is complete. You know that richness is a matter of internal assumption, faithfully executed by the subconscious. This is where the next revelation waits. The understanding that mastery of wealth begins in consciousness and resonates outward endlessly. Envision a world where every thought, feeling, and word you emit carries a subtle vibration that attracts circumstances in perfect harmony with it. This is where Neville's teaching comes alive, because I am rich is not a mere phrase. It is a vibration that signals your consciousness has entered the state of abundance. This is where the unseen responds immediately. The moment your inner frequency matches richness, life begins to mirror it. This is where old scarcity fades. You no longer chase or struggle because the vibration itself magnetizes the necessary people, opportunities, and resources. This is where alignment strengthens. The more consistently you inhabit the feeling of being rich, the more the universe arranges itself in invisible orchestration. This is where joy amplifies. The experience of abundance becomes self-sustaining, feeding back into your vibration with ever-growing intensity. This is where subtle currents of synchronicity appear. Unexpected events align seamlessly to confirm your inner state. This is where Neville's wisdom resonates. You are not manifesting wealth from effort. You are drawing it naturally by sustaining the vibration that wealth already exists within you. This is where clarity sharpens. You begin to notice that outer conditions are reflections of your inner frequency. Nothing more, nothing less. This is where power flows quietly. You no longer force or manipulate outcomes. The vibration you hold organizes reality effortlessly. This is where the bridge of events gains momentum. Your internal state compels life to align, and every step feels guided. This is where identity and vibration merge. You are no longer just thinking wealth, you are being it. This is where old doubts dissolve. They cannot coexist with the certainty of your assumed frequency. This is where inspiration flows. Action becomes effortless, decisions intuitive, and opportunities obvious. This is where patience transforms into confident expectation. You trust the unseen because it is already responding to your state. This is where the feeling of richness saturates your consciousness. Outer confirmation is merely a reflection of what is already true inside. This is where momentum builds. The more you dwell in the vibration, the faster outer reality conforms. This is the turning point. You understand that wealth is never created outside. It is always drawn in response to your inner tone. This is where the next revelation emerges, the realization that mastery of abundance is mastery of your own vibrational state. Picture for a moment what happens when you maintain the inner assumption of wealth, even in the face of appearances that seem contrary to your desire. This is where Neville's teaching becomes unmistakably practical, because persistence is the bridge between imagination and reality, the quiet insistence that what you feel as real must manifest. This is where doubt begins to weaken. The longer you dwell in the assumption of being rich, the less outer conditions can dictate your experience. This is where alignment deepens. You continue to act, speak, and think as the wealthy self, allowing life to mirror the state you have claimed. This is where subtle miracles appear. Coincidences, doors opening, and people aligning are the natural response to unwavering inner conviction. This is where resistance fades. The world cannot contradict the identity you consistently inhabit in consciousness. This is where joy strengthens, knowing that each day spent in assumption reinforces the inevitability of your inner reality. This is where Neville's brilliance is revealed. He taught that the secret is not in external striving, but an unshakable mental and emotional assumption. This is where inner peace arises. You no longer fret about timing or evidence, for your state is already secure. This is where action becomes effortless. Steps naturally flow from a place of certainty, not fear. This is where the bridge of events grows visible. Outer circumstances start to echo the inner reality you persistently sustain. This is where patience turns powerful. Waiting is no longer a struggle, but an expression of faith in the unseen orchestration. This is where identity solidifies. You are no longer acting as if, because persistence transforms assumption into being. This is where momentum gathers. Each thought, feeling, and visualization compounds, reinforcing the state you inhabit. This is where the unseen obeys. The world bends to the reality you maintain with unwavering conviction. This is where old habits dissolve. The tendency to revert to scarcity weakens as your persistence fortifies new patterns. This is where clarity heightens. You realize that the only reason anyone lacks wealth is inconsistent assumption of their true identity. This is the turning point. You understand that persistent assumption is the most potent tool for manifesting "I am rich." This is where the next revelation awaits. The understanding that persistence alone, when combined with feeling, makes outer proof inevitable. Envision a world where every act of gratitude you feel for your present circumstances becomes a powerful amplifier of your wealth consciousness. This is where Neville's teaching reveals a subtle yet transformative secret. Gratitude is not mere politeness or habit. It is the emotional signal that strengthens the assumption of richness within. This is where energy aligns. By expressing appreciation for what you already have, you reinforce the feeling of abundance, which accelerates manifestation. This is where perception shifts. You begin to see even ordinary moments as confirmations of your rich state, and the world mirrors that awareness back to you. This is where inner joy expands. Gratitude transforms scarcity into satisfaction, and waiting into confident expectation. This is where the bridge of events gains clarity. Synchronized circumstances appear more effortlessly because your vibration resonates with appreciation rather than desire. This is where subtle miracles become obvious. Small opportunities, helpful coincidences, and unexpected blessings feel like natural extensions of your emotional state. This is where Neville's precision resonates. He emphasized that feeling grateful for the unseen outcome conditions the subconscious to accept abundance as reality. This is where doubt fades. The act of sincere gratitude leaves no room for fear or questioning. This is where momentum accelerates. Each grateful thought compounds the power of your assumption, making outer manifestation inevitable. This is where alignment deepens. You begin to act, speak, and think from a space of fullness rather than need. This is where faith becomes lived experience. You no longer hope or wish, but know and feel your wealth as present. This is where joy becomes self-sustaining. The more you appreciate, the more evidence of richness appears. This is where your inner state radiates outward, attracting circumstances that echo your gratitude. This is where the unseen orchestrates seamlessly. The universe mirrors the abundance you affirm within. This is where clarity strengthens. You understand that wealth is not created outside, but felt, appreciated, and sustained within. This is where the turning point occurs. Gratitude ceases to be a practice and becomes a natural expression of being rich. This is where your inner self consolidates power. The vibration of thanks solidifies the assumption of richness. This is where outer reality begins to align effortlessly with your emotional state. This is where the next revelation waits. The understanding that gratitude is the amplifier that turns inner assumption into tangible wealth. Think of the moment when every thought you think, every word you speak, and every action you take begins to harmonize perfectly with the state of being rich. This is where Neville's teaching becomes tangible, because true wealth is not just an inner feeling, but the consistent alignment of mind, speech, and behavior with that feeling. This is where the inner world dictates the outer. When you think abundantly, speak affirmations of wealth, and act as someone who already possesses it, the universe mirrors that coherence. This is where subtle power accumulates. The more synchronized your inner and outer expressions, the faster events bend to your assumed reality. This is where resistance dissipates. Contradictory actions or words are no longer present because your inner state governs every choice. This is where clarity strengthens. You begin to notice that misalignment was the source of struggle, and consistency creates effortless flow. This is where momentum builds. Each thought in harmony with your feeling of richness compounds, attracting circumstances that echo your state. This is where synchronicities multiply. People, opportunities, and situations respond naturally to your coherent vibration. This is where joy becomes tangible. You move, speak, and act in ways that express inner abundance, making wealth a lived experience. This is where Neville's insight crystallizes. Identity is reinforced by consistency, and the world has no option but to reflect it. This is where patience becomes confident expectation. You act without tension, knowing your alignment is shaping reality. This is where inspiration flows. The actions you take are guided by the unseen intelligence responding to your state. This is where external proof begins to emerge subtly. Evidence of richness appears because your life now vibrates as if it were already complete. This is where belief transforms into knowing. Alignment eliminates doubt and cements certainty in your consciousness. This is where the bridge of events strengthens. The more coherent your thoughts, words, and actions, the more effortlessly life flows toward your end. This is where identity becomes undeniable. Every action confirms the richness you inhabit. This is where energy harmonizes. The universe conspires silently, arranging details to support your consistent state. This is where the turning point occurs. You realize that wealth manifests most powerfully when your inner and outer worlds are fully synchronized. This is where the next revelation awaits, the recognition that alignment is the living proof of your inner richness. Ask yourself what happens when you begin to notice the quiet signals from the universe confirming your inner state of wealth before any obvious evidence appears. This is where Neville's teaching comes alive, because manifestation often begins with subtle shifts, unexpected words, timely messages, or small opportunities that reflect the alignment of your consciousness. This is where perception expands. You start to recognize patterns, coincidences, and gentle nudges as confirmation that your inner assumption of richness is taking shape. This is where patience gains clarity. Outer results are often delayed, but the signs assure you that the bridge of events is active and faithful. This is where intuition sharpens. You sense the right moves to make and the paths to follow, guided by the unfolding unseen. This is where faith becomes experiential. You trust not because of visible proof, but because you feel the current of manifestation in motion. This is where old impatience fades. You no longer force outcomes because subtle signs reveal the orchestration of life in real time. This is where synchronicity becomes the language of reality. People, opportunities, and resources appear in ways that defy coincidence, echoing your inner richness. This is where joy permeates. You delight in the small confirmations, knowing they are the harbingers of greater abundance. This is where Neville's insight illuminates. Recognizing these signs is part of sustaining the feeling of being rich, as the subconscious registers them as proof. This is where inner conviction strengthens. You feel wealth unfolding even before the outer world catches up. This is where energy harmonizes with reality. The universe responds to the certainty you maintain in the quiet spaces of awareness. This is where momentum gathers. Each subtle confirmation fuels the persistence of your assumption, accelerating manifestation. This is where clarity emerges. You realize that outer evidence always follows inner recognition, never precedes it. This is where trust becomes effortless. You feel guided and supported at every turn, even when nothing seems obvious. This is where the bridge of events hums with invisible movement. Every minor occurrence is a thread in the tapestry of your wealth. This is where alignment deepens. You no longer question the process, for the signs reassure you that all is unfolding perfectly. This is where the turning point occurs. You understand that mastery lies in noticing, appreciating, and trusting these subtle signals. This is where the next revelation awaits. The realization that the smallest sign can be the loudest confirmation of your inner richness. Envision a world where your awareness stretches beyond the limitations of everyday thinking, where the simple declaration, "I am rich," expands not just your bank account, but your entire consciousness. This is where Neville's teaching reaches its profound depth. Because richness is ultimately a state of mind, a conscious experience that transforms perception, priorities, and possibilities. This is where the mind begins to see without restriction. You recognize opportunities, connections, and resources that were previously invisible because your consciousness now vibrates at a higher frequency. This is where old limitations dissolve. The boundaries of poverty, lack, and scarcity fade as you inhabit the awareness of abundance. This is where insight sharpens. You begin to understand that wealth is not something you chase externally, but something that arises naturally from expanded perception. This is where creativity flourishes, ideas flow freely, solutions appear effortlessly, and new paths unfold with clarity. This is where synchronicity becomes your companion. Events, people, and timing align seamlessly with the expanded state you occupy. This is where inner peace anchors. You no longer worry about lack, for you understand that consciousness precedes and governs all external conditions. This is where Neville's precision resonates. You now know that the imagination and feeling you sustain determine the reality you experience. This is where subtle power accumulates. The expanded mind attracts circumstances and opportunities that mirror its capacity. This is where joy becomes intrinsic. You delight in the limitless possibilities now visible through the lens of abundance. This is where the bridge of events gains clarity and strength. The outer world begins to synchronize with your heightened state of awareness. This is where identity solidifies. You are no longer merely aspiring to wealth. You are a conscious embodiment of richness itself. This is where trust deepens. You rely on the intelligence of life to deliver in alignment with your consciousness. This is where patience becomes effortless. The expansion of mind allows you to wait without fear, confident in the inevitable reflection of your state. This is where the unseen orchestrates perfectly. Every detail of life falls into place in correspondence with your inner awareness. This is where momentum flows. Each thought, feeling, and perception amplifies the richness of your experience. This is where clarity emerges. You see that expanding consciousness is the ultimate tool for creating lasting wealth. This is the turning point. You understand that richness is as much a product of your awareness as it is of anything external. This is where the next revelation waits. The realization that limitless abundance is the natural consequence of an expanded, aligned consciousness. Envision a world where the very air you breathe carries the essence of wealth, where gratitude saturates every thought, feeling, and interaction, amplifying the richness you already inhabit. This is where Neville's teaching reaches its delicate transformative layer. Because abundance is not only a state of being, but a pervasive atmosphere you cultivate through appreciation and inner recognition. This is where the inner world radiates outward. The more you dwell in thankfulness, the more the environment mirrors that richness in subtle and overt ways. This is where perception refines. You notice opportunities, favors, and alignments that previously went unseen because your consciousness tunes to the frequency of abundance. This is where joy becomes inseparable from awareness. You feel wealthy not because of possessions, but because the very quality of your consciousness resonates with sufficiency. This is where old scarcity fades. The mental and emotional shadows of lack cannot survive in the persistent light of gratitude. This is where the bridge of events strengthens. The universe mirrors your atmosphere, orchestrating circumstances to align with the rich state you maintain. This is where action becomes inspired. You move, speak, and choose from a place of fullness, and the world responds with effortless reciprocity. This is where subtle synchronicities abound. Small confirmations, unexpected help, and timely opportunities echo your inner wealth. This is where Neville's brilliance illuminates. He taught that gratitude is not only acknowledgement, but the emotional signal that accelerates the manifestation of your inner assumption. This is where energy harmonizes. You feel aligned, empowered, and confident in the natural unfolding of abundance. This is where trust solidifies. The certainty of inner richness requires no outer validation, for your atmosphere carries proof. This is where momentum becomes undeniable. Every thought and feeling of appreciation compounds, drawing ever greater manifestations into your experience. This is where clarity sharpens. You understand that cultivating an abundant atmosphere is the most reliable path to tangible wealth. This is where patience transforms into expectation. You wait in ease because the universe is already responding to your state. This is where identity and vibration merge. You are not pretending to be rich. You are the living atmosphere of wealth itself. This is where inspiration flows. Ideas, people, and circumstances naturally align with the richness you emanate. This is where the turning point occurs. You see that gratitude is not a step, but the environment in which all abundance flourishes. This is where subtle power reigns. The atmosphere you sustain commands outer reality with quiet authority. This is where the next revelation emerges. The recognition that abundance is a living, breathing environment created from within and reflected without. Consider the possibility that every ounce of your financial reality is anchored in the beliefs you hold, unseen yet unyielding, silently shaping every circumstance and outcome. This is where Neville's teaching pierces through ordinary understanding. He emphasized that belief is not passive, but the active engine of creation, and without full conviction, wealth cannot manifest consistently. This is where perception sharpens. You notice that outer events always mirror your internal convictions, and nothing can contradict the belief you sustain. This is where subtle shifts become undeniable. The moment you truly believe in your richness, fear, doubt, and limitation begin to dissolve effortlessly. This is where alignment accelerates. Thoughts, feelings, actions, and circumstances begin moving in unison with the reality your belief constructs. This is where the bridge of events strengthens. The world responds with precision to the state of certainty you maintain internally. This is where identity solidifies. Belief transforms assumption into being, leaving no room for hesitation or contradiction. This is where joy expands. You feel secure, empowered, and fulfilled, not by evidence outside, but by the unshakable truth within. This is where energy harmonizes. Your belief radiates outward, influencing situations and drawing the necessary people and resources toward you. This is where patience becomes effortless. You no longer struggle against time, knowing that belief compresses reality to match your inner certainty. This is where action becomes inspired and natural. Decisions flow from faith, not fear, and the outer world mirrors that effortless flow. This is where synchronicities multiply. The alignment between inner conviction and outer circumstances becomes increasingly visible. This is where Neville's insight crystallizes. You understand that what the mind truly believes, the world cannot deny. This is where subtle resistance disappears. The unwavering belief dissolves doubt before it manifests externally. This is where momentum compounds. Each day of firm assumption amplifies the likelihood of manifestation, making wealth inevitable. This is where clarity sharpens. You grasp that all outer evidence is subordinate to the inner state of belief. This is where identity and reality merge. The belief that you are rich becomes the lens through which all life is filtered. This is the turning point. You realize that maintaining belief is not an exercise, but the living proof of creation. This is where the next revelation waits. The understanding that belief, unshaken and felt, is the ultimate architect of your material world. Imagine the moment when every inner assumption, every feeling of wealth, every persistent belief and aligned action converges into undeniable outer reality, and you finally inhabit the fullness of I am rich. This is where Neville's teaching reaches its consummation. The promise that what you have assumed in consciousness becomes your lived experience, tangible and undeniable. This is where the bridge of events completes its work. The unseen orchestration aligns with precision, confirming the identity you have steadfastly maintained. This is where joy saturates every moment. You feel rich in spirit, in opportunity, and in the effortless flow of life surrounding you. This is where gratitude blossoms fully. Appreciation for both the journey and the manifestation reinforces the state that has now crystallized. This is where identity solidifies. You are no longer pretending, wishing, or imagining. You are the richness you once assumed. This is where outer reality becomes a mirror. The people, circumstances, and resources now reflect your inner abundance with perfect fidelity. This is where subtle power turns visible. The unseen law of consciousness that guided every step is now fully recognized in the evidence before you. This is where momentum becomes unstoppable. The state you occupy attracts further wealth, expansion, and opportunity naturally. This is where the vibration of richness resonates outward, influencing every aspect of your life and those around you. This is where inspiration flows continuously. Decisions, actions, and creativity emerge effortlessly from your aligned state. This is where patience is rewarded. The consistent assumption of wealth has manifested as undeniable reality. This is where faith becomes knowing. You no longer hope or doubt, because proof has arrived in tangible form. This is where synchronicity now feels ordinary. The universe constantly mirrors the richness you inhabit. This is where clarity shines. You understand that every step of imagination, feeling, assumption, and alignment was necessary to reach this fulfillment. This is where the turning point of all effort and thought reveals itself. You see that wealth was never external, but always an expression of consciousness. This is where calm and confidence dominate. You move through life assured, steady, and empowered, no longer dependent on outer validation. This is where mastery is felt. The realization that I am rich was never about accumulation, but about embodying the state and letting life respond. This is where the story closes, yet continues in practice. You live, breathe, and expand from this state, knowing that abundance is your natural condition. This is where the ultimate revelation rests. The truth that once fully assumed, I am rich, is both the seed and the harvest, the beginning and the fulfillment, eternal in consciousness and infinite in manifestation.